and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, this is my pre-runner that I'm back halving right now. Today is going to be more of a technical video. I wanted to cover more about fuel systems and fuel setups for people that are looking to run a fuel cell, whether it be in a race truck like this or in a drift car or whatever. I'm making this video because I didn't see a whole lot of content on YouTube that went into a whole lot of detail about fuel systems, and I would like to share what I've picked up over the few months that I've been putting this together. I'm still new to this, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but I think I can give you guys some insight onto. I've shared this before, but this is the fuel cell I'm going with. It's a Jazz Jeep Speed 32-gallon fuel cell. And basically how a fuel cell works is there is a plastic sort of layer on the inside, similar to the stock gas tank on most cars is sort of plastic. And on a stock gas tank, it has an internal pump in this fuel hanger right here. And so the inside of this is just plastic. There's actually foam cubes inside of it that are rated for fuel. This will help when you take a hard turn or hit a jump or something. It'll make the fuel not slosh around, because if that happens, it can hit the wall of the fuel cell really hard and possibly damage it. So this has the foam cubes inside of it. Now when you're speccing out your fuel cell, you have to first think about what types of fuel you plan on running in the future. So for this one, I don't plan on running E85 or anything like that. Mainly because this is a desert vehicle and I won't be using any boost most likely. And the reason you have to think about the type of fuel you're going to use is because E85 will actually break down the cube or the foam cube material, and it'll get sucked through all the fuel lines and ruin your injectors, ruin your fuel pump possibly, and definitely clog your filter up over time. So that's the one thing to consider when choosing the inside of your fuel cell. I know most people, I don't think in more of the car scene, need foam cubes, and I know that a lot of people that run ethanol get these sort of like wiffle ball things that they put in instead of foam, and you can find those online. They're not actual wiffle balls, but they look like them, and they reduce the fuel sloshing when you turn. So that's one thing you can maybe pick up if you want to do ethanol. And I believe, I'm not sure on this, but they might also make foam cubes for ethanol. Another thing to consider is how much horsepower you're running. Right now this is running the stock 4-liter V6 and it pushes about 100 horsepower. So I plan on upgrading that in the future. Basically, you want to choose the right fittings for the engine you have, because I'm going to be using -6 AN, which AN means Army Navy. So -6 AN lines. These come in nylon braided like this, or you could get steel braided. I don't think there's a huge difference on durability with those. But yeah. So -6, I've heard on an LS can get support up to like 500 or 600 horsepower. And I don't plan on going that high of horsepower with this thing anyways, so -6 is more than enough for me moment, but I could easily upgrade it in the future because this Jazz fuel cell comes with dash 8 pickup and return lines, and this is a dash 10 vent and a dash 6 dipstick. Alright, so after you've decided on your fuel cell and the options with it, and then you figured out what fuel line you want to run, generally dash 8 is probably going to be best for most people. Dash 6 or dash 8, unless you're running a 1000 horsepower drag car, you might want to do dash 10, but the price does go up with every size, so that's one thing to consider. Thinking about where your fuel cell is going to go, this is, in most desert vehicles you want to have all the weight near the rear of the chassis, but it depends on each application. Most of the time you want it probably closer to the center of the car. So once you figured out where you're going to place it and how much, that'll tell you how much line you'll need. Then you can start to figure out, you'll need 3 things generally. This might change depending on what you're building. You're going to need these 3 things. There's 2 types of fuel cells. One that has an internal hanger, and which will store your fuel pump, and I believe sometimes your fuel filter as well, or fuel sock, depending on the terminology. But in this case, the fuel pump is external, so it'll be mounted outside of the... Here's my fuel pump. It is, I believe this is a Walboro 392, and it has dash 6 inlet and outlet. When choosing your fuel pump, you want to make sure you get something that matches your power goals. I've heard that you can get your projected horsepower and multiply it by 0.38, I believe, and it will give you the liters per hour required for your fuel pump. And then there's other factors that you should consider, such as inlet and outlet size. But the main thing to consider is how much horsepower you plan on making. I'm building this fuel system around a naturally aspirated or mild boosted LS swap, so this Walboro 392 should be plenty for me. And since this is an external setup, it'll be easier in the future if I want to upgrade it, because I won't have to pull out the hanger or anything to change it. It's just going to be mounted right over on that tube. Alright, the next thing you'll need is going to be a fuel filter. So this is a 100 micron fuel filter. I got it off of Amazon. It was pretty cheap. If you can, I'd go with a radium fuel filter, but this will work for me for now, and I'll get into why later. But essentially it's just a very tight filter so that it keeps the particulates out of your fuel injectors. And yeah, it's pretty simple, just a fuel filter with 6AN lines on the end. I tried to match all the fittings so that they're all 6AN, except for the fuel cell is dash 8 coming out. So just get a good micron rating on your fuel filter, and if you get a radium one or something, I'm sure it'll be fine, but if you get just a random brand like this, it should also be fine for what you're doing. Lastly, this isn't probably going to look familiar to most people, but this is going to be my fuel regulator. So the fuel pump pumps high pressure fuel to this, and it'll bring it down to the desired pressure that your engine wants. So if that puts out 100 psi of fuel pressure, this should take the 100 psi in, convert it down to 60 psi, and then return the remaining fuel back into this fuel return right here. And you need one of these, because otherwise your injectors would be pushing way too much fuel into the engine and it wouldn't run right. So This is definitely needed. This isn't really a one-size-fit-all, but my engine that is currently in there is a 4-liter V6 OHV from the Ford Rangers, and it requires 60 psi of fuel pressure, and luckily GM vehicles also require 60 psi on their LS engines. So this is actually a fuel pressure regulator. It's called a fuel filter regulator, I believe, for Corvettes. So you can get these off of eBay with all the fittings you need and the mount and everything for pretty cheap. I don't remember exactly, but it could be around 50 bucks. And so this actually does also have a fuel filter inside of it, as well as a regulator. If you can, I would recommend getting a Radium or Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator, because they can be adjusted and they're much more accurate probably than this. But since I'm just going to be running this on my stock engine for now, this should be plenty good for my application. Next, here's some of the tools you might need when installing a fuel cell or fuel lines. So this is an AN line wrench. You can adjust it. This is supposed to be 10 AN, 8 AN, 6 AN, etc. It's made out of aluminum, and these teeth sort of match the AN fittings the best. So the point of this is mostly so you don't mar the paint or the finish off of the AN lines, but you could totally just use one of these if you want. But you might also, the wrench could slip also, and you could strip out the AN lines if you're not careful. So if you can, it'd be a good idea to get either another one of these, or if you have a vise, you can get AN like vise grip things, so that you don't mar it up when you're holding it in the fittings in the vise. But what I did is I just taped the inside of this wrench, so when I'm tightening the two AN fittings together, it doesn't mar it up as much as just a bare wrench maybe. And then I would highly recommend getting some of these clamps. This clamp is not the one that came with the pump. The one that came with the pump was really bad quality, same with the fuel filter. So I just picked up a stainless clamp and an aluminum clamp, just trying out the different kinds. And you just gotta make sure that it will fit on to the fuel pump or filter or whatever you're trying to clamp it onto, because this one almost didn't fit, but I made it work somehow. Or like this, how it gets bigger in this screw portion and then drops down to the normal size. So this thing's almost all the way screwed in. But this is like 10 bucks. So here is the one that came with the fuel filter, I think. And it's just a piece of cheap aluminum, and it totally just didn't work, and I could probably just bend it in half. Like, it's just completely a bad clamp. I didn't want to run it like that, so I just didn't want to run that. And then here's the one of the two that came with the fuel pump, I think. And same thing, it's just the same aluminum material with like heat shrink on it, and it's already falling apart. So if you can, just get a nicer clamp, or you could just run the other clamps and it'll be a pain in the ass every time you touch it. And then so far electrical tape was the easiest to work with for cutting the AN line. When you cut it, you just kind of wrap the end of it around, and then it'll make the nylon or metal not fray apart when you cut it. And also, Some of these pliers are helpful for cutting any of the excess material when you trim the line in half. Also, it's a good idea to have plenty of fittings because you never really know what you're going to need, and you don't want to wait days for these to ship out. All the fittings I'm using are from Evil Energy, same with the fuel line. This is more budget fittings. If you can, you should go with the radium fittings or something like that, of the higher quality kind, but these ones are probably about $5 each usually, but the bigger ones are definitely more expensive. One more thing I forgot to mention is you're going to need some type of lubricant when you're threading the AN lines together. You don't want to accidentally cross thread it or something because the threads are made of aluminum, so they're very fragile. So I just spray a little bit of WD-40 when I'm threading the two lines together. One of the last things I'm going to mention is mounting solution that you come up with. I just made this real quick for mounting this because I have to weld it onto the cage. So it's just gonna go something like that. There's also these style weld-on brackets that you can get, but I think Rough Stuff Specialties sells them, and you can also find them on Amazon. They're a little more pricey for just mounts, but I plan on running them all over the truck, so I'll use them where I can. Alright, for the sake of video, just pretend this is where I want to mount it. I just go like this, and yeah, once it's like that, I could just weld the tabs on and it'll be centered in how I want it, and that's one of the benefits of using these style tabs. Plus you don't have to worry about having a nut. You just have to get the right hardware, and a washer on top of that would be nice as well. I went over this in another video, but I don't really like having the fuel cell directly sit on the tubes. So I made a little aluminum plate, and I actually put a little bit of kill mat on it to make it have a little bit of a cushion so that the powder coat wouldn't just fall off of it. There is a little bit of a gap in this part. Yeah, you can kind of see the air gap. So I might put a little bit of something down right here, so that when the fuel cell droops down, it'll be supported all the way around. Since the fuel cell is plastic on the inside, there is an aluminum shell that clamps it together, and a lot of people mount the fuel cell from these bolts, and that's what I'm gonna plan on doing, is have a couple, maybe capture a couple of these bolts so that it doesn't move around and it's supported. When the fuel hits the side, it'll go through the bolts and then into the chassis. And then also you need to have some kind of a strap on top of the cell so that when the fuel goes upwards, the strap can kind of hold it down and relieve some of that pressure off the inside of the fuel cell and the aluminum shell. This -10 line is my fuel vent, and as you can see, it goes all the way below the fuel cell, so that when the fuel cell is actually upside down, hopefully that never happens, but if it does, then no fuel will be able to go through it because it'll be upside down, and the vent will be the highest point. I actually have to remake this fuel vent because it needs to be in all 3 dimensions of the fuel cell, the highest point. If I have enough line, I might make it do a complete square and then down. So if you think about it, if the fuel cell was that way, then the line right here would be at the highest point, or if it was like this, then the hose up there would be the highest point. so then no fuel would be able to spill out of it no matter what orientation it was in. I only have another few feet of line, so I might not be able to make it completely around, but I'll have to play around with it to find the best fit. So how does an AN fitting work? Well, these come screwed together like this, usually, and basically for dash 6, you just get your dash 6 line and you put it in this end, and these Evo Energy lines actually have like some kind of thread in there so that it'll actually kind of thread onto the outside of this and help you get it all the way backed into that collar right there. You could probably see that. And once it's backed into there, you'll just screw this side in, and what that actually does is it goes onto the inside of the line. It goes onto the inside of the line like this, and it flares it out so that it's not possible for it to leak. And that's why a lot of people choose these lines for their cars, because they're pretty easy to work with for the most part, and they don't usually leak. I mentioned it before, but when you're choosing the options for the inside of the fuel cell, if you're gonna run E85, you have to make sure that there's E85 rated components with that, and that goes the same with the fittings and the lines. So if you're running E85 lines, it's pretty much the same thing as this, but there's like another tube on the inside of this that won't degrade after ethanol use. And so you need special fittings for the line. Just make sure when you're choosing your lines and your fittings, make sure it's all rated for E85. Okay, now I'm going to make some lines and hopefully it goes smoothly. But when you're thinking about the order of the pump and the filter, it goes in this order usually. You want to have the pump first, and then the filter, and then the regulator. You're not supposed to really have anything before the pump because the pump isn't good at sucking fuel out of the fuel cell. It's made for pumping only, so the less resistance that it has while doing that, the better. The regulator has to be closer to the engine so that the pressure it's putting out is more accurate. I want to use as little line as possible if I can. So I got this female to female connector, which means I don't have to run any line in between the pump and the filter, which is nice. I'll try to minimize that whenever I can, but I think I have all the fittings and stuff I need, so I'm just gonna screw these together and then find a mounting spot. I have this 90 degree right here. We'll go like that into that 90 degree, and then the filter will go on that. And if I have another 90 degree, I'll make it go down that tube over there. To start, I'm just gonna cut this to length, and then after I have that, I can then try to find a good spot to mount this, because it would probably be easier to move this line around a little bit than have to make sure this is perfectly to length, if that makes sense. But always a good idea to have extra line rather than not enough. So yeah, I'll make that line and I'll show you guys how to do it. About 4.3, so I'll just say 4.4. Now I'll just unscrew this, and then from there I can measure this, and we said about right there would be good, so I measure from there. That's about there. I'll just put some tape, mark a line right there. I usually use an angle grinder for this, but make sure you're in a well ventilated area, because with the angle grinder, you turn, it's like doing a burnout pretty much, because you're just cutting rubber with the angle grinder. I also tried using like regular hose cutters, but since it's nylon braided, it doesn't work out that well. One thing I forgot to mention is that if you get the same lines as me, the Evil Energy ones with the threads, for the actual nylon or metal tube, or the nylon or metal line, when you're screwing it on, it's actually reverse threads, so that's loosening it, that's tightening it. You can see that it's not quite to the edge, but it's almost there. Once it gets pretty tight, you can see that it's not like, it's not right, it's not flat in there. And when that happens, I just usually get a screwdriver and I kind of like pull on it a little bit. And I'll just kind of readjust it until it fits a little bit better. That's a little bit better. It's all the way against the edge. So now, I've already washed this one out with water and cleaned it out a little bit. So now, you just tighten this. Gotta push it in a little. And then get a little WD on there. Oh, I got more on my hand than on there, but that's fine. And then just start tightening it a little bit. And this is where the 2 wrenches comes in, because probably impossible to do it with just one. But yeah, just tighten the wrench on there. You can see that some of the threads got a little messed up because I was using 2 wrenches instead of the vice grips that you can get. But I mean, I think that's pretty good. Now I just need to do the next one. Make sure it threads on okay. Then should spin reverse thread. Starts going on. And pretty much bottomed out in there. You can see it needs to be adjusted a little bit. That's normal. Spin it the wrong way first. Like pretend you're loosening it and then wait for it to click and then start screwing it in so you don't cross thread it. Then start tightening it down. You can see that even though there's tape, it still kind of goes through. It is what it is. It's like maybe a 1/4 of an inch long, which is perfectly fine because there is a little bit of slack in it. So maybe I can do something with that. But yeah. That looks pretty good to me. Now that I got this one pretty much all done, I want to mount this thing here, and then I also have to mock up with the filter attached, and then see if I have another 90-degree angle fitting so that the tube can go all the way down into the inside of the frame. Okay, so this is the mount I made. Just uses these bolts and these like fender washer style washers just for looks, but they don't really fit, but I think it looks okay. But this bottom bracket I made, I just cut a 1x4 inch piece and then added like a slit in here because I thought I had like normal bolts for this, but I only have rave nuts. So I don't know, this would work, but when I put it up against the tube just kind of like lands right there, and it only has like that much contact. So I was thinking maybe I could like cut right here and here so the tube kind of goes closer to the mount. But then it kind of got me thinking, like at that point I might as well just make all new mounts. So what I'm probably gonna do, I can maybe reuse this metal, but I might just go and make a little, like 2 new tabs like that go like that far on each side, and then that way I would have the riv nut in there, but it wouldn't just be like hanging out the side like that. This would work, but I'd rather make it look a little nicer than this, so I'm gonna make this tab over again. Alright, so there's my tabs that I just made. And then I'll bolt on everything. Okay, so this is the finished product. I think it looks pretty good. So this is like straight ahead, and then it does 90. And then now I'll just need to bolt this in like that. So now I'll tack these pieces in, and then after that I'll be plumbing the rest of this. So I'm thinking a 90 right here, and I'll go kind of behind this, or I could do a 45 so that it connects to this tube and then runs on the inside of it to the inside of the frame rails. I wish I didn't have to use these nut certs, but they're pretty good. They'll work. The main thing when using nut certs is if you have to constantly be taking bolts in and out, then they won't last as long, but this will probably be bolted in a few more times and then stay there for the rest of its life. So the nut certs will work fine on this. I like these little fender washer machined look on this, so I might have to drill out some for this thing when I get that welded in. Okay, so I welded on these brackets and everything fits really nicely. I ended up using a 90-degree fitting right here, and this goes all the way. So it turns out I might need to order a little bit more fuel line for the return, but I plan on putting the regulator where the stock regulator was, which was, I think it was like around right here. So like about halfway below, if you cut this driver door in half, then follow it down to the frame, it's like around this area. So yeah, now since I got everything plumbed, I just need to order some line. And then I got these little 6AN things so you can connect 2 tubes together. So I'm gonna put one right there, and so the return can go along here, and then if I can, I might put one in on these on this, but I don't know if the metal on metal will work. Anyways, then I'll just follow that line to wherever that ends, and this will just split it up. So that'll be a clean way to do things. Okay guys, so I think I'm gonna end it there for now. I just wanted to get the basics out of the way. I'll end up making another fuel system video, probably, of just me wrapping everything up, or just showing all the updates. So when maybe I'll get this tube in and connect everything up to the car, make everything work correctly, and all wired in. But I'll just integrate that probably into one of my normal videos. This video is just more sharing some of the knowledge. If you plan on potentially running a fuel cell in the future, or if you're trying to figure out what you need, I hope this video helped in some way. But yeah, thanks for watching.